I have a definite teaching today, but let's start by just opening the floor up to any specific questions or anything that's up.
I asked a question that last week you mentioned 1 and 7 in terms of the 7 variations of self-remembering. I just like a pointer to where I can find the other 5.
I'll say a few words about that. One of the dangers in the spiritual journey, this is really true in the Gurdjieff work, but many other places too, is that people start focusing on the minutiae of the conceptuality and go no place, because it won't take you any place. It just doesn't matter. But there's nothing wrong with being interested in it too. And so what I was referring to is that in most spiritual practices, including self-remembering, there's, in the wake-up process, there's, Gurdjieff called them 2 conscious shocks that were required to evolve. You have to remember the big picture. We're organisms, no different than a bacteria, a giraffe, a monkey. We're organisms that are designed by nature for one thing, actually 2 things. So what are the 2 things we're designed for? What's the number 1 thing?
Reproduction.
So that's survival.
Survival, yeah.
Number 1 is survive. That's the prime directive for everything that exists, which is a being. And what do beings do? What's the single essential things happening with a being?
Is it experiencing?
Experiencing. These are our interactive experiential machines, as is every other thing. And so, nature provides every being with everything it needs to survive and experience. And that's the end of the story. However, with humans, there's a back door. And the back door is, if the experiencing turns on itself, meaning that the consciousness, this is a conscious generating machine, right? That's what it is. It's a consciousness generating machine. And if that consciousness turns back on itself, self-reflected, that actually begins something entirely new. Now, if you don't do that, that'll never happen. But if that begins to happen, all new processes, the equipment's there, all new processes begin to take place. And there's 2 different things where you can influence this process. You can't influence it in other places, but there are 2 specific places where you can have an influence. And if you learn how to work in those 2 places, your consciousness will evolve. It's just how it goes. And every tradition, I don't care what it is, you can boil it down. If you look at their practices, look at what they're teaching, you can go, oh, they're doing that, or oh, they're doing that. Rarely are they doing both. So the first place where something could happen is self-reflected consciousness, which is what we call self-remembering. Right? And with every practice, there's levels of it. So, for example, when I first learned to self-remember, I was about 22, and that became like the most important thing in my life. I would just remember that I'm here. I'd be walking around and go, okay, I'm here, okay, I'm in this room, okay, I'm at, right? I just remembered that I existed in this space. That's the most superficial. You could go a little deeper, and then you get something like mindfulness. You could go a little deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So along the way, not only do I know that I exist, but I'm also aware of my experiencings. Well, that's a lot deeper. Not only am I here, but I'm experiencing. Well, not only am I experiencing, but I could watch how the experiencing is taking place, what's the medium it's coming into, and what's responding to the experience. Well, that's a much deeper level. Then you could get all the way to, oh, wait a minute. I am here experiencing. I am beingness. Well, now I can remember myself, right? My I amness. That's a way deeper level. Then you could realize that the I amness itself is an artificial simulation, and there's deeper than that. And so that's sort of, you could say, the deepest level of self-remembering. The deeper you go, the more energy is produced, right? Because all of this is a refinery, and let's start off with the simplest part of the refinery. Here's something that nobody on earth can answer. I drink this Frappuccino, and somehow it's transformed into thoughts. How does that happen? Are there any thoughts in this? How does that become a thought? We can't say. There's a transformation that takes place, and we can talk about all the biochemistry. You still can't describe how it became a thought. So there's a certain amount of alchemy already taking place. The spiritual journey simply is an alchemical process where it goes further than just a thought. So new energies begin to open up, which begins to expand consciousness and brighten consciousness. So you become much more clear. You get a bigger picture. You see the patterns more and more and more, and it just keeps expanding. So that's first conscious shock. Second conscious shock is if you're sitting there, sitting in your seat, simply aware of experiencing and what happens as the experiencing is happening. You're just sitting there. Look at the Manjushri statue. Mm-hmm. He's just sitting there, but eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. And Manjushri, which all of you have inside yourself, is eternally vigilant, and part of its job is to keep you awake, balanced, and harmonized in your lower centers. In order to do that, there can be no attachments and no identification. So, what's an attachment? An attachment is you have an emotional response to something, and now you're attached to it. I've actually named the substance. This is just me playing. I'm calling it mesium. The reason is because attachment mesmerizes you to whatever you're attached to. You're literally mesmerized. And all of society, pay attention to anything, are totally attached. They're attached to their sports team, to their car, to anything you can imagine. And the attachment is 100% emotion, which is generated from you, actually from the heart center. It's like a noxious gas that's secreted, and when it does, usually you're oblivious to it, you're attached. And for those of you that are sports fans, one of the easiest ways to do this is watch your sports team, and you're neutral, and you're watching, bad call. Or, oh, screw, they just scored a touch, whatever it is. You'll watch. And what just happened is some of this mesmium cyanotic gas just came in, and you're attached. Right? Second conscious shock is you have to let that go. have to release it. You can't allow that. Because as soon as that happens, you're asleep. Period. You're asleep. And that's how quick it happens. It's so instantaneous. And for most, it's happening all the time, every day, 24/7. On the wake-up journey, you begin to have periods where it's not, you're at peace, everything is, and then something happens. At the beginning, there's nothing you can do about it. But with practice of the second conscious shock, you can learn how to quicker and quicker and quicker let it go. Sometimes the gas is released so quick and so potently, it could last for days. Even with your best of your efforts, you could be angry for days. We've all seen it, or annoyed, or whatever it is. Other times, it's just gone. You're done. But second conscious shock is the ability to remain present. First conscious shock, remember yourself. And second conscious shock, don't attach to anything. The other part of that is identification. So what's identification? Identification is nothing but a belief. I've identified myself as, the most superficial of which is, I am a doctor. I am a male. I am an American, etc. Those are superficial identifications. But you go further and further back, you identify with your beliefs, you identify with your concepts, you identify with your ideas, your postures, your positions, your points of view, etc., etc. Identification. So what happens with identification is that awake, aware intelligence, which is absolute freedom, is now bound up with an identity. And all identities are false. Period. They're all false. And so ultimately, if you want to know what enlightenment is, when we look at somebody like, and I'll use Nisargadatta because he's my personal favorite, that's gone. No attachments, no identification. He remains, by all reports, in the non-dual state of just being a self-aware being. However, and this is really important, nothing else changes. Identifications still show up. Attachments still show up. Emotions still show up. Your personality still... all of it's there. You're just not identified or attached to it. They come and go. It may or may not change with awakeness. There may be no changes. Nothing may change. Or it might. It varies. Personal experience, and with people I know, is the more awake they are, there are changes that take place. However, fundamental things like your ancestral history, your genetic history, your social upbringing, all of that, your karma, your vasanas, your tendencies, more or less, don't change. More or less. It's not like you're going to wake up and suddenly your eyes are going to turn blue rather than, brown. It's not what enlightenment is about. You're just free, right? That's pretty much it. So here we are, and each of us, it is true for the animals as well, live in the world. However, each of us live in our own private world. Period. Everybody lives in their own world. It's a virtual reality created by the mind. It creates a virtual reality. Within the virtual reality machine, it creates what I call a mindscape. That's your virtual reality. So everybody has a virtual reality machine. Think of like the holodeck on the Enterprise, Star Trek. But you can run any program. We're all running our own program. it's 99.9999% unconscious, and more or less you can't do anything about it. That's your mindscape. It just is what it is. That's why an event happens, and this person has this to say about it, and this person has this to say about it. The exact same event, and they're giving you diametrically different. It's because it's in different mindscapes. In their mindscape, it means this. In this mindscape, it means that. There are no true mindscapes. And you can't really escape it. It's there. Doesn't really matter, but you become conscious of it. Within the mindscape, the only way this sort of works with humans is the mind then creates a simulation. What's the simulation? You. Within the mindscape, it creates a simulation which is based on sensations and memories and the voice in your head. And the mind believes that simulation, which is just a projection of the mind, is you. And you've lived your entire life, that's all humans do until you wake up, as though that simulation is actually the truth. I know, it's so bizarre. But the truth, we're pulling back the curtain. You know, this is Wizard of Oz. We're pulling back the curtain and how all of this is happening. You know, and for the Gurdjieffians, the difference in the way that I'm teaching versus the way Gurdjieff taught, Gurdjieff felt like nobody could take the truth. And he said it. And so he wrote in such obscure terms, with endless stories and making up everything. What he said is bury the bone deeper. He thought that was the way to help. This is a different time, different age. I'm trying to be very direct, very specific, and lay it out for you. That's why I wanted this recorded. So you can take it. By the way, don't take my word on any of this. Check it out for yourselves. You have to find out. So it creates this simulation. And the simulation of you has layers to it. The most external layer of which is what's called a persona. The persona is the show you're putting on for the rest of reality. You basically, if you really want to get right down to it, you're a narcissistic predator. That's it. Everything. You're a narcissistic predator. And this is what you want. You want to survive, and then you want as much pleasure as you can with as little pain as you can. You're a narcissistic pleasure trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And people do this in two different ways. For some, the pleasure drive is so strong, they're willing to live with agonizing pain, like drug addicts. For others, they go, I don't like all that pain. I'll modulate my pleasure so I have less pain. So for instance, I wanted to try something new today, so I got this. This is an espresso frappuccino. It's really tasty. It has no sugar in it. Now, sugar would have made, and chocolate has no chocolate in it. It would have made this more pleasurable. I'm not willing to pay for that in the pain cycle. So I'm willing to have less pleasure. Plenty of pleasure for me, and there's no pain, right? So we want to maximize pleasure, minimize pain, wherever we sort of are on that spectrum. And that is, when you really get down to it, everybody you've ever met in your entire life, everybody you're ever gonna meet, are basically apex predators. And all you're seeing is their strategies, the ones they've come up with, to get what they want. Period. Some do it by dominating. Some do it by being submissive. And everything in between. They figure it out. You know, you see it all the time. There's two new people, and they're already looking for, okay, what's going to be the dominance hierarchy here? This one will try for it, that one, you know, and they're working out dominance hierarchies, right? Or somebody goes, oh, I'm pretty weak. I know, I'll attach myself to somebody who's strong, right? So I'll identify with them. I'll be loyal to them. I'll support them. Why am I doing that? Because I'm an apex predator too, but I'm not as strong as that Tyrannosaurus over there. I'll hang out with them. Right? That's all creatures. We're no different than the apes. We're no different than lions. It's all the same. Except the potential, if you're activating the first and second conscious shock, you can wake up out of identifying with it. It's not going to go away. Trust me. You're still going to want what you want. But you're going to modulate yourself in a very different way. You're going to begin to have boundaries you would never cross. Not because of anybody else, but because of your own conscience. You just won't do it anymore. It's just like, no. That's a step too far. So the more awake you are, the more benign you become. Not by intention. You don't have to intend anything. And so on the wake-up journey, as you wake up, you simply become more benign. There's nothing you can do about it. You just are. And overall, along the wake-up, although at the beginning can be very turbulent for years, but as you move up the pyramid of consciousness, what you find is greater clarity, greater peace, greater ease. You're more awake, you're more balanced, you're more harmonized. And when the centers are like that, and you're not run by fear and desire, your life becomes pretty steady. And you live in your overall emotional tone just begins to rise. You're not doing anything, but it just begins to rise.